The film begins with a guy who loved playing video games. At that time, he wanted to try out a new game where you wear special goggles and feel like you're inside the game. Since he was busy with work, he decided to play alone instead of teaming up with others. To blend in and not stand out, he made his character look like one of the computer-controlled characters. He picked skills and gear that most players didn't care about, like using a bow, wind magic, and kicking skills for fighting. He also learned how to make medicine, see far away, and hide himself for protection. He did all this so that nobody would ask him to join their team, but he could still play by himself without getting beaten up. When he finished creating his character, he named him Earth. Then he jumped into the game world, but nobody else was using a bow like him. In this game, you can fight monsters, become a craftsman, or trade stuff with other players. But sadly, as soon as Earth started playing, other players started picking on him. They made fun of him because he looked like a boring computer character, and because his fighting skills seemed useless compared to theirs. After those mean players left, Earth had to accept it because he knew there were risks with the boring avatar he made. On his first day in the game, Earth started with basic training. Learning the basics was important, but Earth got the hang of it quickly. He worked hard to improve his archery, wind magic, and kicking skills. When he was ready to start hunting, he found lots of other players were doing the same thing. So Earth decided to collect medicinal plants instead. He also practiced making medicine until he could even make poisons. Eventually, Earth got another chance to hunt. He didn't plan it, but he came across a rabbit monster. Using arrows didn't work well, so Earth had to kick the rabbit really hard to defeat it. Then, someone saw what Earth did and laughed. They found it funny that a rabbit monster was kicked like a football. They introduced themselves as Zwei and Mi Li. After chatting, Zwei and Mi Li asked Earth to be friends. Zwei wanted Earth to be the funniest player in the game, but Earth wasn't interested. They said goodbye, and Earth focused on getting better at hunting. He practiced his wind magic and figured out how to hide while shooting his arrows, which worked really well. When he got back to town, Earth bought some bread from the computer-controlled characters, but it tasted awful. So he used a quiet alley to practice cooking. He tried over and over again until he got better really fast. The delicious smell of his cooking attracted people from all over the town. Earth was surprised when everyone wanted to try his food. He tried to charge a lot for it, hoping they wouldn't buy, but they all did. Suddenly, Earth was a popular food seller, with long lines of players waiting to buy from him. The next day, since there were no bows for sale in the game, Earth decided to make his own. He crafted a high-quality bow and bought some battle clothes to complete his gear. Even though Earth spent a lot of money shopping, he found a way to make extra cash by selling things in vending machines. He filled the machine with roasted meat and wine-flavored poisons. Then, it was time for him to go hunting. But this time, he was going after a tougher monster. There, Earth used all his skills to defeat it easily and collect lots of items it dropped. When he got back to town, he was happy to see that his goods had sold out. But there was a riot in the city. Turns out there was no more poison in the game, so many players couldn't heal themselves. Since Earth was known for making medicine, everyone asked him to help make more poison. Again, he charged a high price, but players were desperate to buy it. At that time, Earth worked hard making medicine until he couldn't keep up. Luckily, Zwei and Mi Li came to help, but eventually they ran out of ingredients and there was only a little poison left. Then the person who had bullied Earth before came and demanded all the poison. In that moment, Earth refused to give up all the poison because there were still other players who needed it. But this person became more and more arrogant. Suddenly, Zwei tried to protect Earth, but ended up getting beaten down because he was annoyed. Then the bully challenged Earth to a duel. Even though Zwei was hurt, he warned Earth not to be careless, but Earth was fed up and accepted the challenge. Soon after, they met in the virtual arena, and the bully underestimated Earth's skills. When the bully attacked, Earth easily countered with a kick and an arrow to the neck, winning the battle quickly. Shortly after, the bully ran away, and everyone cheered. At that time, they didn't think someone with a bow could defeat a strong opponent so easily. The next day, Earth met Zwei's friends from the blue-collar party. They watched the video of Earth's fight against the bully and were impressed. Zwei and his friends, Nora, Kazamine, and Reiji, invited Earth to join them. They'd planned to hunt wild bears, which are strong monsters. Suddenly, Zwei started to trust Earth's power, even though Earth hadn't agreed to join the hunt yet. Zwei even said that after the hunt, Earth would cook bear meat for them, which made the friends really excited. They eagerly went hunting, but Earth felt weak because Zwei didn't listen to him. During the hunt, they found a strong bear in the forest. Despite using magic and physical attacks, the bear was tough to beat. The party was struggling and running out of energy. At that moment, Earth analyzed the situation and shot an arrow at the bear's head, but it didn't go deep enough. With his last bit of strength, Earth combined wind magic with a kick, hurting the bear. Mealy finished it off with her magic, defeating the bear. As planned, Earth cooked grilled meat for his friends, except for Zwei, who only got bread from the store as punishment for not listening. But Earth felt sorry and gave Zwei some roasted meat. After eating, Zwei decided that next time, Earth would cook another delicious meal for everyone. Earth protested, but Zwei didn't listen. The next day, after the tough monster hunt, Earth decided to upgrade his weapons to make them stronger. He improved his arrows, combat boots, and vowed to boost his attack power. Testing them out on strong monsters, he faced an armored ant that his regular arrows couldn't pierce. But Earth defeated it and got some armor material from it, which he planned to use at the armor crafting shop in town. While in town, players got news about a game update called Dancing with Fairies. In this update, players would get fairy partners, and there'd be a fighting tournament with players and their fairies. When the update arrived a few days later, everyone got their fairies. Excited and curious, Earth opened his crystal, but it unexpectedly broke, making him faint. At that time, Zwei wondered why Earth couldn't get a fairy, while the others showed off their new fairy partners. Suddenly, Earth fainted again, sitting down. There, Mealy mentioned a second chance, assuring Earth that his crystal would definitely work in the next round. Earth felt better hearing that, but his friends were annoyed with him. Surprisingly, all the fairies flocked to Earth, making his friends call him the Fairy Charmer. Earth could only smile at his new nickname. The next day, Earth was approached by a playful wild fairy. Curious, he checked his status and found out he could activate high-level skills. Excited to try them out, he tested them in a dungeon. While exploring, he encountered a huge spider monster. Despite the challenge, Earth defeated it by using his rope skills and deadly kicks. Instead of the usual monster drop, a dark elf appeared. Soon after, the fairy led Earth somewhere, and he followed. Despite the steep path, Earth's new gravity balancing skill helped him navigate it easily. He reached a spot where dark elves were gathered around a rock. Afterward, they moved the rock, revealing a chest with an ancient ring inside. Earth kept it, thinking it was a dungeon treasure, and thanked the night elf for showing him the location. Then a developer announcement appeared. The second round was starting, featuring a fairy martial arts tournament. Back in town, another announcement revealed upcoming game updates, including allowing players to engage in PvP battles. Winners could evolve their fairy partners, and the top 16 players from PvP would compete in the martial arts tournament. Then, there was another update feature. Players could display a rare status above their heads. Additionally, players who hadn't made a contract with a fairy would have their crystal regenerated, giving them a chance to get a rare fairy. Earth grew impatient hearing this announcement. The next day, Earth logged into the updated game and noticed many players looking at him. He was curious and shocked to find a rare status above his head, the Fairy Charmer. However, Earth felt embarrassed by this status. To get rid of the status, Earth decided to engage in PvP battles. He asked other players to join him, hoping to remove the Fairy Charmer label. Luckily, Rona, a member of the Blue Collar group, agreed to PvP with him. At that time, Rona knew Earth from her friends' stories. As they were about to start the battle, Rona's fairy suddenly flew onto Earth's shoulder, canceling the PvP application. They were both surprised by the fairy's unexpected action. There, Earth realized he couldn't do PvP because the elves would reject him. So he and Rona went to the new game location, next to Yes City, where many players came to do PvP. They watched a battle where a player's elf didn't obey him and ended up losing. The player had been mean to his elf, so it rebelled against him. Then, Earth remembered seeing a show like this, where players who mistreated their fairies had to fight against them. If they lost their fairy crystal, and they couldn't contract with the fairy again. Back in the city, players from Nexia visited Earth because of his fairy charmer status. They asked for advice, and Earth gave them tips and rewarded them with food. Then they shared stories and made up after resolving their issues. Behind a wall, they found Silver, one of the game's best players, who needed Earth's help. Soon after, they invited him to talk at home. Silver, who is a player in the game, told a story about someone named Glad, also a player. Glad used to be part of Silver's crew, but became arrogant and disrespectful towards others. Even though Glad's level increased, he couldn't make a contract with a fairy, which made him angry. Instead of taking responsibility, he blamed everyone else in the group. As the leader, Silver had to kick Glad out of the group. Later, during an update, Glad gained new abilities and won many battles in the PvP arena. He still targeted players with Fairy Charmer status because he didn't like their ability to interact with fairies. Silver felt responsible for the trouble Glad caused and warned others to be careful around him. The next day, Earth decided to test out his new skills by taking on a bear monster all by himself. After facing the bear, he noticed that he had gained more strength and learned some cool new kicking moves. Excited about his progress, Earth decided to upgrade his combat gear to make himself even stronger. He managed to get some special arrows and sharp whips to add to his arsenal. Feeling confident, Earth experimented with some explosive materials and successfully made bombs. With his new gear and weapons, he went back to face the bear monster. Surprisingly, he found it easy to defeat not just one, but 3 bear monsters. His archery skills also improved this time, and he discovered that by combining his crossbow with advanced wind magic, he could shoot arrows rapidly in succession. When the participants arrived in town for the tournament, the organizers announced the chosen players, including Earth, Glad, and Silver, who had the highest winning rates. Everyone was excited as the tournament kicked off. Earth and his friends eagerly watched the matches, especially the showdown between Glad and Silver. It was a fierce battle, with powerful magic from their fairies on display. In the end, Glad pulled off a surprise victory using a secret move, causing his fairy to evolve into a fox fairy in human form. But the newly evolved fairy revealed herself as the Fairy Queen, and she was not pleased with Glad. She accused him of using his fairies merely for revenge and violence, not as true partners. So she decided to break her contract with Glad. Furious at this rejection, Glad, known as one of the strongest players, challenged the Fairy Queen to a duel. Despite the Fairy Queen's laughter, she accepted the challenge. The battle was intense, with the Fairy Queen unleashing all her magical powers. At that time, Glad managed to dodge some attacks, but eventually he couldn't avoid her onslaught. Overwhelmed, Glad lay defeated on the ground, spared from death but thoroughly beaten. It turns out the whole situation was a setup by the Fairy Queen in Silver to teach Glad a lesson about being arrogant towards other players. Soon after, the Fairy Queen called upon players who had Fairy Charmer status and thanked them for not forcing their fairies to evolve or fight. As a reward, they were given a cute elf companion. But turns out, the Fairy Queen had a special surprise for Earth. She allowed him to challenge her to a fight, which shocked Earth at first. However, she seemed pleased about it. Excitedly, Earth geared up while the audience eagerly awaited the showdown. Although Earth was nervous about facing the powerful Fairy Queen, he had a plan and was determined to fight. Soon after, the battle happened. At that time, Earth started with a seemingly weak attack to bait the Fairy Queen, who responded with a fire attack. However, Earth's arrow, infused with his wind magic, managed to penetrate the fire and win the Queen. Realizing she had been underestimated, the Fairy Queen became emotional and launched a fierce counterattack. Fortunately, Earth had anticipated the Fairy Queen's next move after observing her previous fights, so he cleverly trapped her with a smoke bomb. Then, he unleashed multiple bombs at once, causing a huge explosion. While the Fairy Queen was injured and used Earth magic to shield herself, Earth used his hiding skill to vanish. On the other hand, the Fairy Queen, confused by the sudden silence, decided to launch a surprise attack. But Earth had planned for this. He fought the Queen with his whip and bombarded her with arrows, reinforced with powerful wind magic. Finally, he delivered a deadly kick, strengthened by his advanced wind magic. As for the Fairy Queen, feeling overwhelmed, admitted defeat. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Earth realized he had forgotten about the tournament in his excitement. Worried about the impact on his laid-back lifestyle, he watched as the Fairy Queen reappeared, tired but impressed by his fighting prowess. After the intense battle, it was the Fairy Queen's turn to give gifts. She requested the fairy crystal shards and an ancient ring that Earth possessed. Using her power, she transformed the broken crystal into a ring adorned with a fairy stone. The Fairy Queen then tried to put the ring on Earth's finger, but he resisted, suspicious of her intentions. Both Earth and the Fairy Queen struggled against each other, but eventually the ring was placed on Earth's finger. Despite his resistance, Earth found himself endowed with all the magical abilities of the fairies. The ring couldn't be removed, and the Fairy Queen bid farewell and vanished. At that time, the spectators were pleased with the tournament's outcome, but Earth felt resigned to his new situation. The following day, many players skilled in archery and wind magic appeared, influenced by Earth's fight with the Fairy Queen. Despite this, Earth still preferred solitude, although now he had the constant company of the Fairy Queen, who could manifest from the ring. Occasionally, he would playfully tap the Fairy Queen on the head for her mischievous behavior. However, things get more interesting when you have friends. So according to what the Fairy Queen explained, Earth tried to use powerful magic called Perisnova magic from a ring she was given. This magic takes a long time to cast, and it uses up a lot of magical power, or known as MP. But the strength of the magic attack was incredible. Then, not forgetting about improving his abilities, Earth upgraded his gear to make himself even stronger. He made his bow stronger, got new boots for fighting, and also got a new robe for battles. The next day, the game developer announced some cool new stuff coming in the next update. They said there would be a new dungeon called Dangeon, with a challenge involving the undead. This dungeon would have lots of traps and mysterious creatures. As usual, Earth started practicing and getting ready before the update. Since the dungeon is tight and narrow, he needed a shield. So Earth started making his own equipment. Then he succeeded in making a shield that was special because it had a bow incorporated into it. A few days later, the game got an update. But even before that happened, many people were already waiting eagerly in front of the new dungeon called Dangeon. While soaking in the excitement, Earth was approached by a peculiar group known as the Power Ranger Party. After enduring their overly enthusiastic introduction, Earth's patience wore thin. Turns out they were short one member for exploring the dungeon because someone in their team had a stomach ache and couldn't log in. Rather than going into the unfamiliar dungeon alone, Earth decided to join the Power Ranger Party. So they set off to explore the dungeon with only an hour before they would be kicked out automatically. He took on the task of spotting traps set up in the dungeon while the Power Rangers, odd as they looked, proved to be skilled at fighting the mystical creatures lurking there. Soon after, they managed to reach the 5th floor but heard cries for help. Rushing to the source of the sound, they found themselves trapped in a room teeming with mystical creatures. It was a tough fight, but they eventually defeated all the monsters, freeing the trapped people in the process. Afterward, a huge treasure chest suddenly appeared. But Earth sensed that it was a trap in the dungeon. He tried to warn the person he had held, but they thought he was lying. Reluctantly, Earth left the room with them. Later, they heard that everyone in the room had died, and their time in the dungeon had run out, so they were all expelled. There, the Power Rangers praised Earth for his trap detecting skills, which also improved his thief abilities. Then, they parted ways as friends. Soon after, Earth thought of a tool to speed up dungeon exploration, allowing him to reach the 10th floor in just 1 hour. He successfully made a thief's key for this purpose. While preparing his weapons, Earth met the Fairy Queen, who looked exhausted from distributing fairy crystals to new players. She had also been teased by male players. Seeing her hard work, Earth cooked buns for her, making the Fairy Queen happy. She even rested in Earth's lap just this once, which he allowed. The next day, Earth went into the dungeon alone, equipped with the gear he had prepared. Despite facing several failures and dying a few times, Earth's thieving skills improved greatly. He gained 2 new abilities: stealing items from monsters and sneaking past monsters without being detected. With these skills, Earth finally managed to navigate through the dungeon and its traps easily, reaching the final floor. Using his wind magic, Earth bypassed all the traps and entered the final room. Here, time stopped automatically, preventing him from being removed from the dungeon. As he descended the stairs, Earth heard a voice calling from below. It belonged to a knight who had explored the dungeon before, but his companions had all died, leaving him alone. Upon reaching the bottom room, they discovered there was no treasure, and the knight died from lack of air. He asked Earth to destroy his monster form so his spirit could be freed. Descending to the final floor, Earth met the knight in his undead monster form. He realized the knight was the last boss of the dungeon. Then, Earth fought the knight monster with difficulty, as it was tough, and even blew away Earth's main weapon. In a desperate move, Earth used a finishing move that drained his magic power, but the knight kept fighting, shattering Earth's shield. Earth managed to use the Nova Shield move, turning part of the monster to stone, but his situation was still dire. Suddenly, the Fairy Queen appeared from Earth's ring and used her magic to freeze the knight monster. Soon after, Earth picked up his bow and unleashed all his moves, along with a powerful bomb attack. With his efforts, Earth defeated the knight, returning it to its human spirit form. At that time, the knight was grateful to Earth, and the spirits of his friends came to take him away. As the knight's spirit departed, he gave his sword to Earth, an ancient weapon capable of destroying anything in one blow. Then, the developer announced to all players that the secret boss had been defeated, marking the end of Earth's adventure in the dungeon, where he received the ancient sword as a prize. The next day, Earth was asked by his friends from the blue-collar group to join them on an adventure in a place called Danjin. This time, they had a new member joining them. She's a healer, but some of the others thought she was a bit full of herself. At that time, Earth could only smile nervously at the thought of it. Finally, the new member arrived, and her name was Elizabeth. Right from the start, Elizabeth seemed to think she was better than Earth. She said he wasn't very good at the game and looked like one of those computer-controlled characters. Upon hearing that, Earth didn't say anything back. He just accepted what she said because that's how he chose to create his character. At that time, Zoe felt bad for Earth because of how Elizabeth treated him. After that, they'd all started their adventure. It turned out, Elizabeth wasn't as experienced in the game as she seemed. Even though she seemed to be doing her best, Earth realized she was actually just a beginner. When they were suddenly attacked by a mystical monster, Elizabeth got so scared that she couldn't use her powers properly. This caused problems for the rest of the group because they needed her help. However, Earth stepped in to help Elizabeth when she was in trouble, and together they managed to control the situation. After defeating all the monsters, it seemed like this experience brought Earth and Elizabeth closer together. Elizabeth was also happy because Earth said she could be relied on. Eventually, they finished exploring the dungeon and went their separate ways. But from a distance, someone was watching Earth. The next day, there was a big update in the game with new weapons and armor. There, Earth was excited to check out the new gear and planned to craft some new armor. But then, a girl with horns on her head approached him. She introduced herself as Ryu, the dragon girl, claiming to be the younger sister of the fairy queen. Earth felt a bit nervous hearing this, worried he might do something wrong in front of royalty. As expected, Ryu said some strange things that made Earth feel embarrassed. He even ended up accidentally hitting his head in frustration. Then he started to believe that Ryu was really the fairy queen's sister. But it turned out she just wanted to try Earth's cooking because she heard it was delicious. Earth politely declined since he had other things to do. However, Ryu insisted on waiting for him until he finished his tasks. So, Earth went to buy the new armor, and Ryu followed along without any trouble. At that time, Earth picked out the strongest armor available and then kept his promise by cooking roast meat for Ryu. She enjoyed it so much that she ate a lot, just like the fairy queen would. Despite this, Earth felt happy knowing that people enjoyed his cooking. He headed home, but on the way, he was stopped by the fairy queen and some other important fairies. The queen told Earth that he couldn't form a contract with fairies. This news shocked Earth. However, the fairy queen explained that all the fairies wanted to form a contract with Earth. If just one of them did, it would cause jealousy and chaos in Fairy City. At that time, Earth understood and accepted this reality. Still, the fairy queen worried that Earth didn't have a fairy companion. So the fairy queen decided to give Earth two magical powers. The first was a technique called the 7-star fairy arrow, and the second was a powerful arrow attack that could absorb Earth's soul and magic power. Earth was happy to receive these powers. Finally, the fairy queen announced that access to Fairy City would soon be open, and she asked Earth to visit. Earth promised he would. After the latest game update, Earth decided to explore the Fairy City area along with other players. But when he tried to enter the city through the gate, a fairy approached him and said that he was invited directly to the palace by the fairy queen. Then a giant bird named Picasa arrived to carry Earth. Only certain people could ride her. Soon after, Picasa flew Earth across the city to the fairy queen's palace. Upon arrival, Earth was warmly greeted by the queen and the senior elves. The main event was a welcoming ceremony for Earth's arrival in the city. Earth was then given a tour of the city, and all the fairy residents happily greeted him. At that time, the event was lively, and everyone enjoyed it. Even though Earth usually preferred a relaxed gaming experience, he found himself enjoying the attention of being known to many players. Later, Earth was invited to the palace, where the queen expressed that all the fairies were excited about his arrival. She asked Earth to stay temporarily in Fairy City, and he agreed. Then, as Earth was leaving the palace, he sensed someone watching him. It turned out to be the fairy queen waiting for him behind a wall. Earth, feeling suspicious, said he needed to go home and find a place to stay. But the fairy queen insisted he stay in her room. However, Earth quickly decided to leave. The queen was surprised and frustrated because she couldn't stop him in time. Earth found a place to stay in a tavern in the southern part of Nexia City, a place without many other players. Soon after, he continued cooking for himself as usual, but the delicious smell attracted customers, and the tavern started selling dishes made by Earth. Earth enjoyed his life at the tavern, But one day the elf nobles in the city heard about him. Then he had to hide because one noblewoman wanted to take him away and make him her personal chef. At that time, the residents of the city protected Earth by lying to the noblewoman, saying he was in another part of the city. She went searching there. Because of this incident, Earth had to leave the city. The people who had come to love his cooking were disappointed. Despite that, Earth promised to visit the tavern again someday. In the evening, Earth quietly left the city. The gatekeeper, who was also a customer at the tavern where Earth lived, helped him escape. As Earth walked outside the city gate, someone else called out to him, offering to help him escape. It was Zetten, a regular customer at Earth's tavern who loved his cooking. Earth climbed onto Zetten's back, and they left the city. Soon after, they arrived in Nexia, known as the Music City, and searched for a place to stay. Turns out, Zetten was familiar with this city and helped Earth find accommodation. Exhausted, Earth fell asleep. When he woke up, he couldn't move his body. It felt like someone was pressing down on him. Peeking under his blanket, Earth was startled to see a ghost-like figure. But it turned out to be the Fairy Queen, who then treated Earth kindly. Suddenly, the innkeeper walked in and was shocked to find someone in his bed. Earth panicked and tried to explain, but things only got more complicated. When Zetten arrived at Earth's room, they were both startled to find the Queen there. To add to their surprise, a group of dragons had also arrived. Ryu, feeling jealous, scolded the Fairy Queen for being too indulgent. Earth had no choice but to accept the unexpected chaos. Eventually, the Queen explained that the nobles who had caused trouble for Earth had been punished. However, the punishment was so severe that it frightened those who heard about it. Afterwards, Ryu quickly took her brother away to return to their palace. At that time, Earth felt very tired from the commotion, even though he had just rested. When things calmed down, someone entered the room and asked Zetten for help. It turned out to be his daughter, Mina, who had disappeared. Then, Zetten decided to help, and Earth offered to join the search. Shortly after, they began searching in the forest. There, Earth used his skills to detect the enemy's presence and found two people surrounded by monsters. They rushed to help and found Mina injured. Then, they fought off the monsters, and Zetten used a potion provided by Earth to heal Mina's wounds. Soon after, Zetten and Mina teamed up to defeat the remaining goblins. At that moment, Mina felt happy to be helped by someone she admired like Zetten, who was a bit embarrassed by the attention. Earth then asked them to head home while he finished up his business. They left him behind. Afterward, Earth threw a bomb at a bush, revealing a person hiding there who turned out to be a human trying to kidnap Mina. When the person attacked Earth, he easily fought back and defeated him. Soon after, they returned to town, where Mina reunited with her mother. As a reward, Earth suggested that Mina and Zetten go on a date since it was clear they like each other. It turned out Mina had admired Zetten for a long time. Zetten was surprised but happy that his feelings were reciprocated. The next day, they said their goodbyes as Earth prepared to return home. To make the journey quicker, Earth called Pikasa, who arrived promptly, surprising the innkeeper. Earth then flew back to his hometown. When Earth returned to town, he treated Pikasa to lots of delicious food as a reward. After enjoying the meal, Pikasa thanked him by giving him one of her feathers. This feather had special powers to relieve fatigue. Then, Pikasa left to return to Fairy City. The next day, Earth heard screams coming from the forest. He rushed towards the noise and found a dragon egg that had just hatched, with 3 dead NPCs nearby. Soon after, Earth rescued the dragon and fed it. Since the dragon was still hungry, Earth cooked meat soup for it. At that time, Earth cooked a whole pot of soup, but didn't get to eat any himself. He then called the Fairy Queen for guidance, but instead, she was shocked to hear about the red dragon. The Queen explained that red dragons were very dangerous and couldn't control their power, unlike dragons like Pikasa's younger sister, who can interact with other creatures. The Fairy Queen explained that the red dragon child was actually the kidnapped offspring of the Dragon King. Earth realized this could lead to serious problems and even conflict between the two nations. Soon after, the Queen's men reported that 2 red dragons were approaching the city. They quickly went to meet the dragons. When the dragons arrived, they accused them of kidnapping their child, making the Fairy Queen uneasy. Eventually, the dragon child was returned to its parents. The dragons could sense that Earth had taken good care of their child through telepathy. They apologized for the misunderstanding. As a gesture of goodwill, the dragon offered Earth a wish. Earth wished for peace and to dispel suspicions between the fairy people and the dragons. The Dragon King granted his request and left. The Fairy Queen thanked Earth for considering the peace of her people. Earth decided to continue his work in the city and asked the Fairy Queen to keep the incident a secret so he wouldn't attract too much attention from other players. The next day, Earth was summoned to the palace. An aide from the Dragon King had come to discuss a problem with the Dragon Child. It seemed the Dragon Child wasn't eating the food provided there. Earth listened silently as the Fairy Queen realized the issue. Earth decided to cook the dish he had made for the Dragon Child before. The Dragon Aide eagerly devoured it, even asking for more, which annoyed Earth a bit. The Dragon Aide then asked Earth to cook more food for the Dragon Child. So Earth quickly gathered the ingredients and prepared the food. The food was neatly wrapped, and the aide hurried back to the Dragon Palace. Feeling unexpectedly tired from dealing with the Dragon Nation, Earth prepared to go home, but the Queen stopped him. She suggested he rest in her room. Of course, Earth promptly escaped, and the Queen failed to catch him again. Meanwhile, at the Dragon Palace, the Dragon Child eagerly enjoyed Earth's food, even confusing the Dragon King with its enthusiasm. At that time, the dragon's assistant attempted to cook the same food Earth made, but unfortunately, it didn't taste good at all. Meanwhile, a giant green dragon outside watched the confused assistant. Later, the dragon flew to Fairy City and disguised itself as a human. The next day, Earth woke up to find the Queen sticking close to him. Quickly, Earth used a move to evade her and went for a walk in the city. However, he felt uncomfortable with all the attention he received. To make matters worse, Ymir the dragon approached him on the street. Not wanting to deal with dragons anymore, Earth told Ymir he had the wrong person and left. But as he tried to focus on something else, the Queen and Ymir intercepted him again. Feeling overwhelmed, Earth ran away and sought shelter to log out of the game. Deciding he no longer belonged in Fairy City, Earth planned to return to his hometown. But when he woke up and prepared to leave the inn, he discovered wanted posters with his face plastered all over the city. Angry, Earth went to the palace and forcefully opened the door. At that time, the Queen noticed that Earth was upset, but when she tried to explain, he didn't want to listen. Earth demanded the Queen remove the ring on his hand, which made her sad. There he also told Ymir that he wouldn't be a slave to the dragon, even if it meant just cooking. When Earth's request was refused, Ymir felt his pride was hurt. Then, he challenged Earth, intending to make him his slave. Emotionally charged, Earth accepted the challenge. Soon after, Ymir transformed into his dragon form, ready to fight. Suddenly, Earth shot an arrow at him, but it had no effect. Earth struggled against the dragon's attacks. Despite dodging, the dragon pursued him and beat Earth until he fell. Shockingly, Earth's shield was destroyed, leaving him cornered. Determined, Earth began to heal himself and vowed to fight to the end. However, he countered by throwing bombs into the dragon's mouth, injuring himself in the process, but causing the dragon pain. Soon after, Earth prepared to use the powerful 7-star arrow technique given by the Fairy Queen. He launched the arrow, hitting the dragon, but Ymir endured the attack and became even angrier. He retaliated, destroying the fighting area. Thinking Earth was dead, Ymir didn't notice Earth using a hiding technique to survive. With only one chance left, Earth used the Fairy Queen's final technique, which was the strongest arrow attack that would absorb his own soul and magic power. Despite the risk, Earth launched the attack with determination. Soon after, Ymir cast wind protection magic, but it couldn't stop the arrow from penetrating and injuring him. Unfortunately, the attack drained Earth's energy, leaving him weakened, but Ymir survived. Earth, exhausted, bravely detonated the remaining bombs, causing a massive explosion. Both Ymir and Earth perished in the blast. Shortly after, red dragons arrived, and one of them began to revive Earth. Confused but determined, Earth chose to be resurrected. The Dragon King apologized to Earth for Ymir's reckless actions. He explained that Ymir had forced the Fairy Queen to issue a wanted poster for Earth, threatening to destroy the fairy country if she didn't comply. Earth was shocked to hear this. He realized the Queen had tried to explain earlier, but he hadn't listened. However, the Dragon King had actually intended to stop Ymir and give him the death penalty. When he arrived, Ymir had already been defeated by Earth. The king was grateful for Earth's heroic actions, though he found it hard to believe a human could defeat a dragon. He thanked Earth for cooking for his son and gifted him 3 items: dragon armor, some money, and a sparkling bow. Earth happily accepted the gifts. As for the crossbow, Earth couldn't see its status at all. The king explained that the bow was a relic left by a fairy who once fought alongside him. This bow would reveal its true form only to someone it trusts and recognizes as its new owner. Earth was thrilled to receive such a rare weapon, one that was alive and had feelings. Returning to town, Earth bought a robe to cover his new armor. He then visited the palace and approached the sad fairy queen. Earth explained everything he had learned from the Dragon King, helping him understand why the queen had taken certain actions to protect her people. Earth also apologized for his earlier emotional outburst and asked the queen to remove the ring from him. He didn't want special treatment because of the ring, but he didn't harbor any ill feelings toward the fairy queen. She was relieved to hear this. Despite her sadness, the queen finally destroyed the ring. Earth promised to meet her again someday before they parted ways. Earth left the fairy city and continued his journey home. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is when dealing with dragons and fairies, always bring extra bombs and never underestimate the power of a sparkling bow with feelings.